Hi, kids. Ready? Ready to read with me today? Miss Osborne the Mop? Let's find out what happened with Tamsen, shall we? Chapter 4. Tamsen, gasped Jody hoarsely. Be Tamsen! Uncle John poked his head in the door. Do you know where your Aunt Margaret is? He asked Jody. Jody stared at him silently. Her heart was pounding in her chest. Dill came suddenly rolling down off the top bunk. Yes, sir. She said she might go over to the Rubens for a few minutes, and I heard the car a little while ago. So I guess she's left, he said. Tamsen slowly wound in and out between his feet. Oh, said Uncle John. I'd forgotten that. I took a walk down by the creek, and I didn't hear her leave. He glanced down at Tamsen. Funny thing, when I was coming up the steps, I could see Tamsen's shadow on the wall in the hall. He looked as big as a tiger. Some trick of the light, I suppose. He went out, and they could hear him going downstairs. Some trick of the is right, hissed Dill. Jody, what's got into you? I was scared, confessed Jody. I was scared too, said Dill. Whatever made you do it? Suppose Dad had seen that tiger. Or worse yet, suppose Tamsen had clawed my arm off. Oh, do you really think Tamsen would have hurt you? Cried Jody. Tamsen might not have, but that tiger would, Dill told her. You ought to see the rips he made in my sheets and mattress. Oh, dear, said Jody. How will you explain that to Aunt Margaret? It won't matter. All things in this house are pretty old and ragged anyway, Dill explained cheerfully. And I guess Mother's not surprised at anything that happens to my sheets. At least she never has said anything, not even the time Bill Rubin and I used one to carry a snapping turtle around in it. Poor Aunt Margaret, she really does have a hard time, thought Jody. Anyway, you'd better think twice before you do something like that, Dill warned. It was kind of fun. Tamsen made a neat tiger, but wow, what a pickle we'd have been in if Dad had seen him. Jody gave Tamsen a timid look. She didn't know whether or not she wanted him to sleep on her windowsill anymore. Come on, urged Dill. Let's go outside and turn a stick into a motorcycle. Stupid, it's getting dark outside, said Jody. You couldn't see to ride. Sure, I think motorbike has lights like a car, said Dill. Well, I think it's your turn to think twice, said Jody. You'd have to walk miles and miles out into the woods to get to a place where nobody would see you or hear you. You know how dark and still it is up here at night. Oh, rats, complained Jill. I guess you're right. But let's do it first thing in the morning. Here? Jody, please? Okay, agreed Jody, and she yawned. Right now, I better go write Mother a letter. I meant to do it yesterday, and then all this happened. Back in her room, Jody sat at the unsteady little table by her bed and opened a box of letter paper. Aunt Margaret had given it to her. It was just plain white paper without anything on it. At home, Jody had a box of letter paper with a bunch of little pink roses in the corner of every sheet, and another box with kittens all across the tops of the sheets and on the insides of the envelopes. But she had forgotten to bring it. So she had to use this plain old white paper, and it looked so dull and empty. It was hard to fill up a page without putting in some complaints about Dill or how lonesome she was or not getting to go to the beach. She tried to be cheerful, but before she got through, something dismal crept into every letter. Now, of course, she had plenty to fill up this page, but she didn't dare tell it. Oh, if she could only work a miracle on this summer and make it into the kind of summer it had started out to be. She picked up a sheet of paper and stared at it. Be a $5 bill, she whispered. The money crinkled in her fingers. If she could only turn this paper into enough money to pay for college for Steve and Roger, then Daddy would come home from France, and Steve and Roger could quit their jobs and they could all go to the seashore together. She turned the bill over and over. What a funny thing money was. Just a piece of paper, she thought. But having it when you needed it could make a lot of difference. Daddy had explained to her once how this paper wasn't really worth anything, but it stood for silver and gold kept in the treasury, or something like that. Of course, since she had made this money, there wouldn't be any silver or gold for this bill. It was counterfeit then. That was what had made her feel uneasy about the bill she had made for Dill. It was counterfeit, and it was cheating to use it. And besides, she might have to go to jail for making it. Jody was quite certain she didn't want to go to jail, not even in order to buy Daddy an extra special birthday present. She sighed and ordered the bill to become a sheet of paper again. But after a minute, she turned the plain white paper into a sheet of palest green, with a spray of delicate white flowers in the corner. That wasn't counterfeit, and it was a pleasure to write on. "Dear Mother," she began. "Here's a good spot," said Dill. "It's miles from any place, and nobody can hear. The ground's fairly level, and there aren't too many trees, so I can do some real writing." Jody nodded. Dill was so pleased and excited about the motorbike, she was beginning to be a little excited about herself. She really did owe him something. He was keeping his part of the bargain and hardly teased her at all. As a matter of fact, she kind of missed it. Life was pretty dull without Dill teasing. Now she got a stick from among some blackberry bushes and laid it on the ground in front of them. She stared at it a moment, and then she glanced at Dill. "Well, go on," he cried. "What's the matter? What's stopping you?" Jody looked foolish. "I can't do it," she said finally. "I don't know what a motorbike looks like." "Oh, good grief. Sure you do," cried Jill. "Roger had one, remember? He used to let you and me take turns doubling with him." "That was years ago," Jody pointed out. "I was hardly even 8. I can barely remember it." "Well, try hard," urged Dill just desperately. "A motorbike's just about like a bike, except it's bigger and heavier, and it has a motor. Roger's was red, remember?" Jody screwed up her face tight with the effort of remembering. She pointed at the stick and said, "Be a motorbike." The machine was red, anyway, and shiny and new-looking. Bill walked slowly around it. He shook his head. I think this is more like a motorcycle than a motorbike. I don't know whether I can manage it or not," he said. "Well, it's the best I can do," said Jody, stroking the red, bright fenders. "If I could see one again, maybe I could do a better job." Dill mounted the seat and stretched his legs to reach the footrests. "Are you sure you weren't thinking about a motorcycle?" he asked. "A motorbike has pedals, and this doesn't." He punched some buttons and the lights came on. "See, it's got a starter like a motorcycle." He kicked at something near his foot and the engine whirred and coughed and died. The machine shuddered from one end to the other. "Well, anyway, it works," he said delightfully. "I don't know how you can make an engine that works when you can't make a motorbike that isn't about 2/3 motorcycle." He squeezed and turned the interesting little gadgets on the handlebars. "Look here, Jody," he began, turning toward her. As he moved, his foot struck the starter once again. With a sudden roar, the vehicle leaped into life and careened through the bushes. "Be careful, Dill!" cried Jody. You see that picture? As the motorbike, like motorcycle, whizzed straight at a tree, and then at the last moment veered aside. Oh, look out!" Wobbling and wavering, Dill sped in and out among the oaks and hickories. He was going faster and faster, and Jody thought he looked a little scared as he rushed by her, clinging to the handlebars. You see him? "Oh, watch out!" she shrieked. As he vanished down the steep slope, she ran to look down after him. But just as she reached the top of the hill, he came roaring back up, straight at her. Jody screamed and jumped backward, tripped, and fell full length among the blackberry bushes. The motorbike turned sharply and desperately to one side and crashed back into a tree. From among the briars, Jody heard the clatter of the falling machine and the engine's last faint growls and groans. She struggled up, sobbing, and ran toward Dill, who lay stretched at the foot of the tree, still as a stone. "Oh, Dill," she wept, "are you hurt? Are you dead?" After a moment, Dill sat up and rubbed his arm and untangled part of the handlebars from around his left ankle. I don't think I'm old enough to drive one of these things," he said at last. "I'll bet it isn't legal." Jody sighed with relief. He wasn't dead. He didn't even appear to be broken anywhere. Of course, he was bruised and scratched, but Aunt Margaret was used to that. Jody was pretty much scratched and bumped herself. "And I've lost my glasses," she said crossly. "Get up, Dill, and help me look." But Dill was busy examining the gash in one knee and a big black and blue spot on one of his arms. "I think I broke a rib," he said, poking himself in the chest. Jody went over and rummaged among the blackberry runners until she found the glasses. They weren't broken, but one earpiece was badly bent. Dill got up and set off toward home, limping and holding his hands against his ribs. Jody put on the glasses with the bent earpiece sticking out from her head like at a wild angle and started after him. She'd only gone a few steps when she remembered the motorbike. She ran back and pointed an accosting finger at the tangled mass of red metal and wheels. "Be a stick," she said severely. What an ordinary-looking little dry branch to have caused so much commotion, she thought as she ran to catch up with Dill. At lunch, Aunt Margaret listened to a very complicated explanation about the accident. It wasn't lying, Jody thought, as Dill talked on, but it wasn't exactly the truth. They couldn't tell Aunt Margaret the truth, as Dill pointed out. She wouldn't believe it. "All I can say," Mrs. Tracy declared finally, "is that I never suspected there were so many fir trees running around in the woods, waiting for the opportunity to attack innocent children." "Can I have another sandwich, please?" asked Dill. Aunt Margaret passed the sandwiches. "At least this accident hasn't seemed to affect your appetite." Jody shot her an indignant look. She'd only eaten one sandwich. The truth was, Dill smelled so horribly of various ointments and liniments. He took her appetite away. "Jody, I have to go to Wolftown this afternoon," Aunt Margaret said. "There's a man in the bank there who will mend that earpiece. When I get ready to leave, remind me to take your glasses." "Yes'm," Jody said meekly. "Now," Aunt Margaret went on, "today is Thursday, so while I'm gone, you know what has to be done." "Yes'm," Jody said again. Dill groaned. On Thursday, Dill and Jody were supposed to clean their rooms. They put clean sheets on their beds, picked up their clothes and books, tidied tabletops, and ran a dust mop under beds and chairs. Jody didn't mind. It wasn't half as much work as cleaning her room at home. But Dill always acted as if he'd been asked to perform all Hercules' 12 labors, his father said. "There are popsicles in the freezer if you want them," Aunt Margaret said as she stood up. "The clean sheets are on the table in the upstairs hall, and the dust mops are in the closet in the kitchen. There are 3 of them. So I think Dill ought to be able to find one if he looks." Dill's usual excuse for not mopping the floor was that he couldn't find a mop. "All right, I'll do it right away," he said calmly. Aunt Margaret and Jody both looked at him suspiciously. He was up to something. Jody was sure. He had a glint in his eye. But he didn't say anything more. He just limped out into the kitchen and got himself a banana popsicle. Jody took an orange one and went outside with it, where she wouldn't have to smell the mingled odors of banana and liniment. When she'd finished, she fetched a dust mop from the closet and carried it up to her room. Dill was sitting on her bed, holding his clean sheet in his arms. He was grinning quietly to himself. "What do you want?" asked Jody. "You better go and make your bed." "Listen," exclaimed Dill. "How would you like to never have to make a bed again? How would you like to be free from worry and care forever?" Jody giggled. "You sound like a TV commercial," she said. "What are you talking about?" Jill sprang up and then groaned and held his ribs. "Ouch," he yelped. "Jody, I just can't make my bed today." So you can have it done for me. See, you can make me a bed maker. All you have to do is say the word. Jody stared. You mean a robot? She said in a whisper. Dill considered. No, he said at last. I've seen robots, and they're not so hot. They really can't do much. And the mixed up way you do things, you'd probably end up with something that wouldn't work at all. I was thinking about something alive that could move around and work and think and take orders, sort of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Miss Osborne, Jody's fourth-grade teacher, had told her class the story of the sorcerer's small apprentice and had played the music that went with it. Jody remembered it well, so now she hesitated. But he got in all kinds of trouble, she reminded Dill. Yes, but that was because he was messing around with someone else's magic, Dill pointed out. This is all yours. And if you don't think it's magic anyhow, try it, Jody. If you don't like it, you can always turn it back. He seized the dust mop and turned it upside down. Here, use this, he said. But be careful. Make sure it has all the things it needs, like eyes and ears and hands. Jody gazed at the mop. It would be kind of fun, and as Dill said, she could undo it when she wanted to. Be alive, she said slowly, with arms and legs and ears and eyes and a mouth and a brain. She must have been thinking about Miss Osborne. Certainly the creature which stood before her now was thinner and grayer than Miss Osborne, but not much. Its fluffy hair fell over its face, just as Miss Osborne's did. And when it spoke in Miss Osborne's high, fluty, elegant voice. What a lovely day, it said, which was exactly what Miss Osborne said every morning, even if a blizzard was raging outside. Dill chortled. Boy, oh boy, this is neat, he cried. Jody, called Aunt Margaret, I'm leaving now. Would you bring me your glasses? Jody took off her glasses and ran out into the hall. Aunt Margaret was standing at the top of the stairs. Thanks, Aunt Margaret, said Jody. No trouble, said Aunt Margaret. You and Dill work hard. I want your rooms to look extra nice because Uncle John's bringing home company tonight. So make your beds neat and mop thoroughly. All right, agreed Jody, smiling. And she ran back up to her room. Dill was walking gleefully around Miss Osborne the mop. It's very impolite to stare, said the mop sharply. Bill paid no attention. He picked up his clean sheets and pillowcases from Jody's bed. Here, he ordered, go into my room and make up my bed. The mop drew herself up stiffly. From behind its woolly gray hair, its eyes suddenly gleamed out. It certainly was like Miss Osborne, Jody thought. That was exactly the way she looked when the class got noisy and badly behaved. Don't be rude, young man, said the mop. I have no intention of doing your work for you. I heard your mother say you were to do a thorough job on your room, and I think you'd better get at it. Dill glared at the mop, and it glared right back. After a minute, Dill's eyes dropped. He turned and went out, carrying the sheets. And Jody heard him in his room, pulling his bed out from the wall, getting ready to put on the clean sheets. Chapter 5.